Welcome back, everybody. Today we're going to be reviewing the vowel markings in Hebrew. So, the last 2 weeks we went over the Hebrew alphabet. You are expected to be able to recognize and know the alphabet by now because this is the next step in our Hebrew learning. It's referred to as the nikudot, which literally just means dottings, and we refer to them as the Hebrew vowel markings. So different sources use different charts, but for this lesson, we'll be using my own take on the vowel chart. So on your papers or your notes, I want you to create a table like this, where each row represents a vowel sound, and we'll be using an English letter to transliterate that vowel sound, and each column represents that sound's duration. So the differentiation between long, short, and reduced vowels, it's not going to be audibly noticeable when we pronounce words, but making this distinction is important when it comes to grammatical rules involving certain letters and certain vowels. So it is also very important to get used to that concept. And today we're going to be using the letter Aleph as our placeholder for our vowels. And in English, we use two main sounds for each vowel, like a short a, and a long a, which is a. But in Hebrew, there is only one sound for each vowel, and it's the same as Spanish vowel sounds. Um, so while we're simply going to be using a, e, I, o, u, I will also include other ways to remember the vowel sound so you don't get confused. But if you have that Spanish background, I would just recommend just read it as you would in Spanish or basically just not in English. All right, so we're beginning with our first vowel, which is an A sound. And this vowel sound has three nikudot, has three dotting marks. Again, as you see, I do put the letter A, but the sound is A. So you're never going to get an A sound, a hard or long A, but really it's just an A sound. So the first one is called a kamatz gadol, and the kamatz gadol, if I were to enlarge it, is just a long, it looks like a T basically, with a long head. So that's a kamatz gadol, and it goes under the letter. This goes for any letter, it goes under it. Okay, and the kamatz gadol, it translates literally to the great kamatz, because there is such a thing as a small kamatz, a kamatz katan, but that we're going to see later on. Just remember that the kamatz gadol is the long form of the ah sound, and it looks like a T shape. And then the short vowel is called a patach, which it basically just removes the bottom line from the kamatz gadol, and it's just a horizontal dash under the letter. Okay. And then finally, the reduced vowel is the chataf patach. This literally means the reduced patach. And what it does is it adds two vertical dots. So here's the first one. I'll try to make these dots noticeable. So there's the chataf patach. Actually, let's put the line a little above. There you go. So anytime you see these three marks under a letter, it indicates an ah sound. So what does a kamatz gadol sound like? Ah. What about a patach? Ah. And a chataf patach? Ah. All three make the same noise, the same sound. Now, if I wanted to practice, let's say here, right under my frame, I'm going to put the letter bet and a kamatz gadol. What sound is that going to make? It's going to say ba. Alright, and let's try a different one. If I wanted to do a chaf, or sorry, let's do a kaf and a patach, that's literally just ka, ka. As you see, we use the letter K to transliterate kaf and the letter A to transliterate patach. That's all it is, ka. And then if I wanted to do, say I wanted to do ayin with the chataf patach, that's just a a, right? Because the ayin is a silent letter. Moving on, we have our second vowel sound, which is an e. And this also has three nikudot. It has three dotting marks. Again, we're using the English letter E, but this sound is actually e. E. Okay. The long e is called seri, and it's just two horizontal dots right under a letter. So we're going to use just an X. Let's just use an X. It's going to be 2 dots under a letter. Now, uh, as we've said, right now we're treating it as just an S sound, but I do want to make the clarification that a more Ashkenazi pronunciation of the tsere is an A. A. So it sounds like, imagine you're saying E-I. Okay, A. And you'll hear this in some Ashkenazi pronunciations, like let's say the name of the tribe of instead of saying Levi, they say Levi, Levi. The same goes for the first book of the Bible. We would say Bereshit, but a more Ashkenazi pronunciation is Bereshis, Berei. Instead of Bereshit, they say Bereshit. And you'll see it transliterated in many Ashkenazi writings with EI. But in Sephardic Hebrew, the more prominent sere pronunciation is just an S sound. So it really depends on who you're talking to and what sources you read the most. But if you are more familiar with the Ashkenazi or the English side of Jewish literature and culture, you'll want to try getting it down as an EI, as an A sound. But if you're more on the Sephardic or the Spanish side, like let's say, for example, I've told my Spanish-speaking community that really just treat it as a simple E. They're never going to need the A sound. Sephardic Spanish communities or people of that background just want to pronounce it as E. Okay, so next is the segol. This is the short S sound. And this is a little easier. It's just the 2 dots, but with a little one added under to look like a little upside down triangle. So that is the short E pronunciation. Okay. And then there's the reduced vowel with the chataf segol, which is, it kind of is a rare appearance. The same with the chataf patach. And same thing there. It's the same as the short vowel, but it adds 2 vertical dots on its right side. Okay, so anytime you see these 3 marks under a letter, it indicates an S sound. And again, as I mentioned at the beginning, I do want to stress that you might be wondering, well, don't I have to pronounce one longer than the other? Really, no one makes that type of distinction. The distinction being made here is not just for it's not for the sense of you have to get this down or else you'll die, but it also isn't just it's just for fun. No, but really what we're doing here is we need to get these differentiations down of length because it will apply to later rules, and that's something you won't want to forget because then I'll just be straight up. You will regret ignoring it and not taking it seriously. Basically, you will want to get these lengths down. But in terms of pronunciation, don't worry about it. So if let's go over some examples. If I were to write a lamed and a tseri, now if I came from Ashkenazi background, I'd say lay. But more Sephardic or just a common one is just le, le. Now, what about the segol? Let's do a mem and then a segol. The segol is so it's me. We're doing consonant vowel me. And then finally, let's just do the aleph and the chataf segol. It's just an Aleph is a silent letter and you're going to see this. The most popular example I can think of is the word Elohim, which is God or power, mighty one. Elohim does start with that chataf segol. And their next vowel sound is E. Now you might be saying, what do you mean we just did E? No. That last one was E. This, which we're going to use the letter I, and I put in parentheses E sound. It's always going to be an E sound. And this one only has 2 nikudot, 2 dotting marks. And English speakers might find this a bit confusing because the letter I is used to represent the sound E, and that's why for our purposes I've included that double EE sound. And most, if not all, transliterations I've seen of this vowel do use the letter I. Very, very rarely do I see it. I mean, I guess, yeah, like really like people that are just beginning, they do a double E to help them remember, but most, I can't show you a single Siddur or a single piece of Jewish literature that I have right in front of me anywhere that uses the double E, it's always it's pretty much mostly 99% of the time the letter I, representing that E sound. So you'll also notice that both vowels here, and there's only two by the way, both vowels, they share the same name, but one is called male and the other one is chaser. So what's the difference between chirik male and chirik chaser? Well, male means full or complete. Okay, and you'll be able to remember that because in order for a chirik to be full or complete, it must be accompanied by the letter yod. So only then, with the presence of the letter yod, is it male, is it a full or complete chirik. However, if the letter yod is missing right after the chirik vowel mark, then it is chaser, meaning lacking. Whoops, lacking. Or deficient because, well, the yod is not there. Okay, so when the yod is present right after the chirik mark, the one dot under the letter, it is male. When the yod is nowhere to be found, it's missing, it is chirik. So again, anytime you see these two marks under a letter, it indicates an E sound, E. For example, if I wanted to put the letter mem with the chirik male, including the yod, that says mi, mi. And if I wanted to do, let's say, the letter tzadi with just a chirik chaser, no yod, same sound, tsi, tsi, because that's the tzadi plus the chirik, tsi, E sound. So our next vowel sound is O, which has up to 4 nikudot. It has 4 dotting marks. Now, the O here, it's not like the English, the short O like God or not, but just think of the word no. O, it's a hard, long O. Now, here too, we also find the concept of male and chaser, and for our purposes, we'll be considering these both as long vowels. So, the first long vowel is cholam male, right here, because it is complete. Remember that it is full with the presence of a vav. Okay, look at the vav here. And notice the difference, that this time it is a vav and not a yod. Okay, and the short vowel is a cholam chaser, because it is incomplete, it is lacking without the vav, as you see here. So, like I said, there technically is a difference in that. Professor Garber at Los Angeles Valley College, he teaches cholam chaser. He'd call it a medial vowel, but only because we're beginners, we will not be stressing about that column as its own, but we'll just conflate it as both being long. And again, the difference is just the presence of the vav making it full. All right, next is the short vowel called kamatz katan. Now, don't freak out, because for sure you'll notice it's the exact same marking as the kamatz gadol, which we saw its sound. Well, you might be asking, how could I possibly tell the difference if they're both the exact same mark? Like, there's literally not a single difference between both marks, but one is an A and one is an O. Well, the truth is, you won't know easily. Okay, I'm not going to lie to you. Instead, what I will have to say is that once you grasp the concept of understanding context, meaning memorization of words, you'll know when it's pronounced as O. That doesn't mean that, it's a 50-50 chance. No, not at all. But rather, I'd recommend you should simply default to the A sound as kamatz gadol, because that is the case, I'd say, even 99% of the time you're reading. But there are very few instances when it is pronounced as O, and we call it kamatz katan, which means the small kamatz. And an example I give is, like, let's say the Hebrew word for all, considering everything, all, is kol, and sometimes it comes out with the kamatz katan. Don't make the mistake of saying kal, thinking it's a kamatz gadol, but rather it's kol. And you'll know that because every time you see the word, you'll recognize that it simply translates to all or everything. You'll know what it means, and you'll just by default, once you get used to it, you'll notice when the kamatz is supposed to be treated as an O. But don't worry, just keep that in the back of your mind, basically. But don't be nervous or don't be like nervous every time you're reading something with a kamatz katan saying, oh, was it an A or no? Just treat it as an A. Okay, that's my advice. And then finally, there is a reduced vowel, the chataf. Oh, sorry. Yeah, chataf kamatz. And it looks like it's just basically a kamatz with two vertical dots, which is also an O sound. But in my experience, this chataf marker is actually it's pretty rare. So anytime you see these four marks under a letter, with the most popular, of course, being the cholam maleh and chaser, it's going to be an O sound. So for example, let's say I were to do bet with a vav, but actually it's not a vav anymore because, well, it is a vav basically, but it's not treated as a consonant. It's simply a vowel marker because with the presence of the vav, the cholam turns from a chaser to a maleh. This would be pronounced just bo, bo, bo. So you might be wondering, well, what about the vav? Don't I say bov, or don't I pronounce the vav at all? No, you don't pronounce the vav. When the vav is treated as a vowel marker, that's all it is, a vowel marker. You don't treat it as a consonant. Okay, let's under here, let me just do a lamed with a kolam chaser, which is just a dot at the top left. Notice how this is the first time we're seeing vowel markers that are not under the letter, but instead the cholam is always going to be on top. It's always going to be on top. Anytime you see a vowel marker on top, it is an O sound. That's a good trick. This would be low, low. And then, as I mentioned, in the word kol, if you see this, you might think it's kal, but it's not. It's kol. Kol, always going to be the word for all. And then finally, we'll just leave it as the aleph for the chataf kamatz, just an O. Our last vowel sound is oo, oo, which only has two nikudot, two dotting marks. Yes, this vowel sound is oo. So for my English-speaking friends, I wrote the double O to help you remember. It's not U, but it's oo, oo. And you'll remember, let's say, think of English words like boot or root. So the long vowel is called a shuruk, and it always appears on the left side of a vav. And this is the only vowel marker that appears on the side of a letter. Okay, this is the only dotting. This is the only nikudot that appears on the left side. While the cholam was on top, the shuruk is in the middle. Okay, and it's always going to be attached to a vav. And here too, the vav is basically only treated as an aid for the vowel. It is not pronounced as a consonant. So if you're transliterating it, do not put a V, put its respective vowel, which here we're seeing the letter U. And then finally, there's the short vowel, the kubutz, which is unique in that it is 3 diagonal dots under the letter. All right, there's no other nikudot or marking that I can think of that's diagonal. This is the only one that's especially 3 diagonal marks. So anytime you see these 2 marks under a word, it indicates an oo sound. Okay, so let's do, imagine I was doing a vet and a shuruk. This would be vu, vu. Or what if I did a vet and a kubutz? Vu, vu, again. And if I wanted to transliterate it, the vet and the shuruk. The vav disappears. It's simply there to serve as a vowel marker. So as I recommended at the beginning of our lesson, you should have been following along with your own vowel chart. So by the end, your vowel chart should look like this. Okay, and indeed, these are not all the markings in Hebrew. There are more markings and dottings, but this is our introduction to specifically the vowel sounds. Okay, there's never going to be another marking that, oh, actually, it's pronounced as this vowel. Those markings, we'll go over them next week. We'll go over them in a future time. Next week, we'll actually be looking at more markings and other miscellaneous rules that are good to know as you begin to practice your transliterations. So, as of right now, you're not given any homework, or you're not given any tasks of sort of let's work with pronunciations of short words or nonsense words, because you're expected to dedicate this time into learning the Hebrew alphabet, and now you're going to learn the nikudot, the vowel signs. So that's it for today. Your homework really is to continue studying and practicing, because these names, I don't expect you just to say, oh, that's an A, or that's an E, or that's an U, but really you should be able to memorize their names as well. It's definitely worth learning in the long run, especially for a future where, as you'll see next week, there are certain grammatical rules for certain vowel sounds. So you're going to want to differentiate them by name as well. But also, it's definitely worth learning and memorizing for a future where you are going to be teaching someone else. So, yeah, next time we'll be going over a few more grammatical rules that are essential to know before we enter our next phase in the series, where we're going to be putting our learning into practice. So, until then, until next time, shalom, shalom.